I welcome all of you and welcome our distinguished speakers. I'm Shafiq Ghabra, and I'm a professor of political science. So we'll be moderating this session in as much as I can, as distinguished as the discussion, I hopefully, will be. So our issue is the issue you're all here for, the Trump administration and its policies towards a variety of issues in the Arab world, in the Middle East, including Iran, Arab-Israeli, Turkey, so North Africa, Levant, GCC. What happened during these 100 days, and where are we most likely going to end up with the complexity of the situation as it is evolving? So that will be our focus for today. This is a joint session between the Brookings and the Center of Gulf Studies at Qatar University, which Abdullah is quite a leading personality in that, a director of that program. So we have the three distinguished speakers. John Hudak is a senior fellow in governance studies, and he's the deputy director of the Center for Effective Public Management at the Brookings Institution, not here, in Washington, D.C. I'm getting it right. So in Washington, D.C. He's the author of a book titled Presidential Pork: White House Influence Over the Distribution of Federal Grants. That could be very important to read. He had his PhD, he received his PhD in political science in 2012, so relatively young compared to my PhD, from Vanderbilt University. And in addition, we have Dr. Abdullah Baabood, the director, Gulf Studies Center at the College of Arts and Sciences, where we are now in Qatar University. And Dr. Abdullah, in addition to his PhD, he has an MBA, so there is a business side I see here. And he's into international political economy in his doctorate, and his PhD is from the University of Cambridge. So Abdullah's interest also goes to so many different international relations, dimensions, and aspects. We have Dr. Adel Abdel Ghafar, whom I visited his university a few days ago in Australia, and it's the National Australian University. So Dr. Adel is a fellow here at the Brookings in the Doha Center. And his book, he's author of Egyptians in Revolt. And maybe they're still in revolt in a certain way. The political economy of the labor and student movement, 1911 to 2000.
Yeah, 1919, 2011. But
yeah, that's
yeah, it's a big period.
Big, right? I mean, this is like 100 years era. He holds a PhD, as I said, from Australian National University. So I will start the way we're going to go: John, Abdullah, and then Adel. And so that's how we've kind of agreed by consensus. So John, you can all speak 5 minutes, or you can speak 5 minutes, and then we'll have some questions and answers, then go to the next speaker, etc. If you want 5 to 7, that's okay. Sure. But let's hear your perspective from an American center, from a central thought from Washington, how you've seen the Trump administration's focus, relation, policy, whatever you can start this discussion, let us hear it. Yeah, please.
Well, Shafiq, thank you for the introduction, and thank you to my host, the Brookings Doha Center and Qatar University. Always both very gracious in having me out, and thank you all for coming today. I'm going to talk about what is on the minds of most Americans and many people around the world, and that is the new president's first 100 days in office. And as Shafiq said, I'll offer this from the perspective of an American, as well as an American political scientist who studies the presidency for a living. And in many ways, everything I have been trained in about how the presidency works, what a president's first 100 days should look like, how relations between Congress and a president of the same party should result in policy outcomes, has been tossed out the window in the first 100 days. I was here last February to talk about the presidential election and made a lot of bad predictions, and my apologies for that. I will say I was in fairly august company about expectations about how the presidential election would pan out, and ultimately it went in a different direction. But alas, as a student of the presidency and of American politics generally, you sort of recenter yourself and start to learn anew about a new president and his politics. Over the past 100 days, things have been very complicated, and Shafiq asked me to talk a little bit about the focus of the new administration, and in many ways that's an oxymoron, because there is no focus in many areas of policy in this administration. I think in part that has to do with the president, who is just as surprised to be president as I was, as many Americans were, as most people around the world were. From what I have heard, his own campaign came to him with exit polls that morning and said, things don't look good. And if you are running a campaign consistently behind, and even though I think the president puts forward, even as a candidate, a very confident demeanor, in reality, I truly believe he was surprised to be elected. And the challenge then, not just for him, but especially for his team, was a lack of seriousness about what to do the next day after the election. And so in many ways, the scattered nature of the president is in part his own fault. But in many ways, it's the fault of the team around him to not prepare a man who is the first American president without any political, diplomatic, or military leadership experience. You cannot expect someone to be able to do a job that they have spent no time in their life preparing for. You put a team around you to do that. And the team that the president has chosen is a mixture of ideologies, of backgrounds, of experience. That's about the end of where that diversity ends. But he is someone who is reliant on loyalists rather than experts. I think that's most prominently displayed by his two closest advisors, his daughter Ivanka and his son-in-law Jared Kushner. They are individuals who I have no doubt are extraordinarily intelligent, talented, well-meaning individuals who have not spent a single day in government, who have not studied government, who do not understand how national level politics and policy moves forward. And so they are, as the closest advisors to the president, not complementing his weaknesses with their strengths, but reinforcing his weaknesses with their own weaknesses. And that is a disservice to the president. That is political malpractice. That is a team that is not serious about a president pushing through a legislative agenda and the policy change that he wants. If you don't care for the President of the United States, you might think that's ideal. If he's handcuffed or crippled from enacting change, you might say, put more of those people in. Stop everything that he wants to do. In that sense, the president's doing a pretty good job of fulfilling your wishes. If you are a Trump voter, if you are a Trump loyalist, if you are someone in the United States or outside of the United States who sees Donald Trump as an opportunity for action, then the team that the president has assembled is hurting what you want and your goals. And so moving forward, what we have to look at is what the president has achieved in 100 days. And the answer is not much. He's rolled back some regulations around environmental policy and around labor laws in the United States. But his big ticket items, which were changes to immigration came in the form first of a ban on all entrance to the United States from 7 majority Muslim countries. Federal court struck that down as unconstitutional. It was replaced by a very similar ban that banned entrance into the United States from 6 majority Muslim countries. That has since been enjoined, temporarily stopped by federal courts, and has not had an effect on policy. In addition, the president wanted to drastically change healthcare policy in the United States. His own party in Congress could not even agree to vote on a bill. And so ultimately, if I were advising the president, I'm not, but if I were advising the president, I would say, do what you do best and fire a lot of people around you and replace them with people who know what they're doing. Because from the outside looking in, it does not appear that this White House knows what it's doing. The people who the president has put into place are not prepared to carry out the duties asked of them. And what's more, the American president gets to make about 4,000 political appointments. The president has appointed people at a slower pace than any of his predecessors in modern history. And if your goal is to drastically dismantle the previous policy in the United States and replace it with something drastically new, you need a team of appointees to help you carry out those efforts. The president doesn't have that team in place. And so in that sense, every day from now forward, this is the 101st day, every day moving forward, that he keeps that team in place and stops from fulfilling all of the roles that he has at his hand to fill. He is handcuffing himself, and he is stopping himself from meeting the goals that his supporters have and the promises that he made as a candidate to be president of the United States.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for that. So that's scary, isn't it? I mean, what you're telling us, yeah, I mean, how many of the 4,000 appointees have been appointed?
About a little over 100 have been confirmed.
100 out of 4,000?
Yeah, he's only nominated a few hundred, so probably less than 10%. Has he even asked someone to fill the role?
Because usually with every administration, it used to be even 5,000. It used to be more.
Yeah,
and they will just, like I remember when Bush was elected, all the Texan hats were there, and there were several thousand that came. So here, we're not having this.
It's a slow process for any president, but for this president in particular, it's been a little bit easier. He should be appointing people at a faster pace. Every president before him had to face, for their nominees that required to be confirmed by the upper house of our legislature, that they needed to overcome a filibuster.
But many don't have to be confirmed.
None of them. And most don't need to be confirmed. Yes. And now the ones that do need to be confirmed don't face a legislative filibuster. It should be easier for this president, and he has made it harder.
Okay. Can you tell us something? I mean, this whole resistance.
Sure.
I mean, there is resistance to this, to the lack of focus, lack of experience, nepotism?
Yes.
Something that can be. What's the resistance in America?
So the resistance is an effort in the United States to push back against the current administration. In fact, it trends on social media with a hashtag resistance. One of the first moments that we saw this was the day after the inauguration, when many, many more people came to a march for women's rights and women's empowerment than came to the president's inauguration. Now, he'll tell you a different story, but pictures don't lie. Women came together in unprecedented ways to march on Washington. I have a friend, actually my communications director in governance studies at Brookings, lives on Capitol Hill. She lives maybe 15 or 20 blocks from the Capitol building. And she said on Inauguration Day, she was sort of terrified because she thought all of these people are going to be walking by my house to go to the inauguration, and it's going to drive my dog crazy. My dog is going to bark all day long. Her dog didn't bark on Inauguration Day. The day after, however, her dog was crazy because the flood of people walking to the Women's March was remarkable. And the saying goes now in Washington, on the weekends we march. Yesterday was a climate change march. Over 200,000 people came to the city to march. Today, in a couple of hours, will be a workers' march. There was a science march. There are marches every weekend in Washington in a way that shows that while I think a lot of people fear, especially liberals in the United States, fear President Trump's impact on democracy, on democratic values, on democratic norms. In the sense of peaceable organization, no one has done more for that democratic value in the United States than President Trump. I have never seen people march like this in the 5 years that I've lived in Washington and the many years that I've been observing Washington. He is bringing people out, mobilizing people. True also that he's mobilizing people in support of him. But when you look at polling, you see why the marches are the way that they are. So in the most recent...
And let's conclude. Say this and let's conclude.
Sure. Among women in the United States, Donald Trump is... women believe he's doing his job favorably 35%. Unfavorably is 59%. People under the age of 30, it's 33% support against 63% for a lack of support. Those kinds of numbers are driving those people into the streets to register their contempt.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. We'll continue this discussion. Sure. Now we go to you, Dr. Abdullah. How do you see it from your side? In Qatar, in Oman, in the Gulf, in the Middle East, focus on Iran, GCC states, and what have you. It's yours now.
Sure. Thank you very much, Shafiq. Can you hear me? Is it?
Yes.
Okay. Shafiq, thank you very much. And this gives me an opportunity, first of all, to welcome Your Excellencies here and ladies and gentlemen to Qatar University.
Can you hear at the end? Can you hear?
Such a pleasure to have you. Can you hear?
Yeah. Can you hear? Okay.
And it gives me a particular pleasure to welcome John again. This is, I think, the third time that we have done this, and I agree we got it wrong in the first and second time. But we are here to talk about 100 days after, and also to welcome my friend and colleague here, Adel, as well, to the panel. From the Gulf perspective, it was and still is quite perplexing to look at what happens and what's happening in the United States. There are, as John was saying, there are many people did not expect Trump to win. I think also here in the Gulf there was no expectation that he would win, although some of the local governments or some of the regional governments have got it right. At least one or two GCC governments have managed to work very closely with the Trump administration and invested heavily on that, and they're trying now to reap the benefits. From the Gulf, when we look at what happens in the United States, of course, the United States is a global hegemonic power and has the Gulf states' security and well-being also rests on how the United States reacts and manages the region. So whatever happens in D.C. and what decisions are made in D.C., especially when they relate to the region, are very important given the sensitivity of the regional issues here, as you know. And the Trump administration is seen by many people here in the Gulf as a completely different outlook from what it was during the Obama administration. During the Obama administration, there were, of course, ups and downs in the relationship because of a number of issues and differing priorities between the Obama administration and the Gulf states, and there were even some conflicts, whether it was the nuclear deal with Iran, whether it is the war in Yemen, whether it is the Iraq issue, the Syrian crisis, and the red line that was crossed by the Syrian government, and so on. all of these issues had created some kind of misunderstanding between some of the Gulf states and Washington, and they were trying to manage it in one way or the other. And this is not to say that the Gulf states have always had good relationship with the U.S. The U.S. has been a strategic partner, yes, but there has been ups and downs throughout the history of the relationship. However, it was within managing margins. This time round, it is very difficult. It is difficult to predict. Not only people in the United States don't know what is going on, but here, when we look at it, we don't understand, the contradictory views of the pre-election, the 100 years, the 100 days, and after, and what is going to happen. And I also would add that 100 days is too early to judge. It's too. It will not give us the full picture, but it gives us an indication of how this man and his administration are going to think, especially on major issues. And now, what are the major issues that are related to the Gulf states? From our perspective here in the Gulf, the relationship with Iran and the nuclear deal is, of course, one of the most important issues. Now, what we have seen is the president saying that he would tear the agreement, and now there has been kind of a shift on that. So we don't understand what does that mean. He now wants to confront what he calls, Iranian hegemonic ambitions in the area. And again, what does that mean? It's not clear to us. He said he wasn't going to interfere in the region, and it's America first, and all of that, and he's going to, stop any military action, and so on. And yet, we've seen the first test in Syria, where he actually decided to send his missiles and bomb the airport. What does it mean if the Syrian regime was to do it again? Is he going to continue with this, or is it just an aberration and just sending a message to the Syrians? Not only that, I believe he's now saying that he's going to send some troops into Syria. How is that going to inflict on the relationship? And is the United States going to have a hands-off from the Syrian crisis, or is it going to be gradually pulled into the crisis there? It's not clear what he means by the war on terror and fighting ISIS. Of course, he is supporting the regional efforts, wants to be behind the scene, but he's also sending not only personnel to train the Iraqi army and some of the rebels in Syria, but also troops on the ground. And we've heard that he's sending some troops now to Afghanistan. All of these kind of contradictory to what he's been saying before the election.
Can you conclude?
Yes. In Yemen, he did say he didn't want to interfere in Yemen, and then he's the one who actually sent his missiles and hit the Yemeni territory, and in fact it did in 1 week damage than the whole year of during the Obama rule. So we see contradictory views. He wants to work with the Gulf states on one hand, but at the same time, he wants to help them to secure their security and so on. But at the same time, he's asking them to pay. Only recently, he's asking for the Saudi Arabia to pay for the security, and that goes, of course, for all the Gulf states. What does paying mean? Aren't we paying enough already? In one way or the other, isn't the arms sales that are being sold to us, is that not enough? What does he mean by that? From the Gulf states also perspective, they see him as a transactional man. Mm-hmm. He's someone they can do deal with. Mm-hmm. And our people here, our rulers, are very good at this. they know how to make transactions. They are very astute, capable of making transactions. They've always paid for their security. They will continue to pay for it one way or the other. So from that perspective, it suits the Gulf states to have someone who's a transactional, who's not ideologue, who doesn't have very strong views on certain things. And he said, I don't have any views about anything. I can change as things go on. There are issues, of course, from the Gulf states' perspective, is what is he going to do with, in terms of the two-state solution and the movement of the embassy to Jerusalem. As he said, although he'd come back on that, there are issues about how Trump is going to treat and consider the Islamic Brotherhood or the Muslim Brotherhood in the region, because as you know, there are Muslim Brotherhoods in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia who are part and parcel of the political fabric there. So is he going to consider them as a terrorist organization? And if so, what implication is this going to have? What about the Muslim ban?
Continue that as we discuss. But I have a question for you.
Sure.
What is the state of arms sales for this year or next year? Is there anything in the pipeline?
Good question. I don't have an exact figure on that,
But could it be arms also?
Unlike the previous administration, where they would put conditions on arms sales to the region, especially to Saudi Arabia and to Bahrain recently, he said his administration doesn't care about that. The issue about human rights is no longer an issue, or good governance or democracy is no longer an issue that the Trump administration is going to consider. And that has always been one of the kind of tricky points in the relationship between the Gulf states and the United States. In one hand, the United States wants to secure this region, but they say that the security and stability will only come if there was some kind of political reform and economic reform that leads to having a domestic and internal security. He doesn't see that. So from a Gulf states ruler's perspective, that is a very welcome, not only from the Gulf state, but most of the Arab authoritarian regimes in the region will actually welcome that. They see a way that they can deal with him. He doesn't care about democracy. He doesn't care about human rights.
He doesn't care about American values. He doesn't care about American Constitution.
Absolutely.
That's very...
He's a transactional man, and they can deal with that. So there are a number of local governments here, or regional governments, are very, very happy with what they see there, and they have establishing good relationship with him. As if you've heard that, one of the first leaders...
But are the populations of the region happy with Trump? Is the populations of the region happy with Trump? And that's my last question, then we're going to go.
Yeah. It's difficult
because... is it always we all agree or we don't agree?
Yeah. We don't have like a real census of
yes, but what do you think?
I think there are people who are happy with what he does, especially when it comes to the relationship with Iran, because there is a very strong anti-Iranian sentiment that has been building up. In his position towards Syria and ISIS, but I think they are unhappy with the Muslim ban. That's not something that goes very well here. They are unhappy about what happens in terms of his announcement regarding the Palestinian issue, whether they're moving in the embassy or the two-state solution. People are very worried about his administration, his contradictory views and attitude here.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Adel?
First of all, thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here with the distinguished colleagues and friends, and also being here at Qatar University, where I taught a number of courses last year. Before I jump in on specific issues with a focus on North Africa, I just want to make just 3 general observations for an outsider. And I think some of these observations help us understand and see the impact they will have on U.S. foreign policy. I think the first observation is the importance of the optics, of the spectacle to the president, and how he's perceived to his constituents and indeed to the world. Of course, this perception is not something new to any politician. It's important how he's perceived. But I think President Trump takes this to the next level as a president from non-traditional political background and an actual reality TV star. So the optics are very important. So seeing himself as the ultimate deal maker, bringing peace to the Middle East, solving the Israeli-Palestinian crisis, and so on. So how the president sees himself is very important. The second observation is how to just observe the presidency and the president trying to get a balance between soft power and hard power. And so far unsuccessfully in being able to get that balance. Traditionally, of course, US foreign policy goes between soft and hard power, and arguably soft power has more tangible and better long-term results over long-term. However, what we've seen is, for example, in the most recent budget, which the budget director labeled as a hard power budget, meaning that there's increase in defense spending and in homeland security, and there are cuts at the State Department and US aid. This is, in my opinion, quite unfortunate and threatens US perhaps moral leadership in the world. And I think even most recently, not only there are certain positions at the State Department that are not filled, but actually there are talks of cuts at the State Department and bringing US aid under the State Department for quote-unquote efficiencies. I think this will be quite unfortunate. The unbalancing of soft versus hard power, and even according to Secretary of Defense James Mattis, he once put it: if you don't fund the State Department fully, then I need to buy more ammunition. Okay. The third observation is what Dr. Abdullah spoke about, is less values-based diplomacy and more transactional-based diplomacy. So let's focus on human rights and governance and rule of law. This is not to say, of course, that successive US administrations have not pursued their interests around the world, but there's a slight shift definitely from the Obama administration to the Trump administration towards this transactional diplomacy. And also diplomacy is always transactional, but it always happens in the background in a very subtle way. But for the first time ever, I think we have a president who does away with this subtleness and asks people in the public to pay. So I think Dr. Abdullah touched upon GCC security, but we also have the example of NATO and Germany. We also have an example from the other side of the world in Asia, Japan, as well as South Korea, just the blatant quid pro quo. Ironically, as Dr. Abdullah said, this approach is very appropriate for our region, for a number of authoritarian regimes and who are quite happy with this approach, do not want to be pontificated to about human rights and so on, and prefer a more transactional approach which goes down very well in the region.
Well, then my question to you, his policy towards Egypt.
Well, that leads us very smoothly towards the policy towards Egypt. In essence, Egypt was the low-hanging fruit in terms of US foreign policy towards the Middle East. The reversal from some of the coolness that the Obama administration exhibited towards Egypt since 2013 and the coup. So President Trump, or then candidate Trump, actually met Sisi on the sidelines of the UN last year. And both were effusive of praise of each other. And it's not really difficult to see why. They have a very similar worldview, us, black and white worldview, the fight against terrorism, this strongman approach. Of course, President Sisi had met also Hillary Clinton during the same time, but in the Egyptian media, the Trump meeting was covered in a very different way, and Trump was seen as almost that the government was betting on him. So again, we have the Egyptian government was betting on a Trump win, and they correctly had the right bet. Most recently, just to add as well to that, in addition, the perception of Trump in Egypt as now we have friends in the US and Obama was pro-Muslim Brotherhood and all of this, so they're effusive of their praise of Trump. But when it comes to like the Muslim ban and some of these issues, they're a bit silent. So they tend to focus on the aspect of Trump as now the friend of the Egyptian regime, but do not actually go into the Muslim ban because this is actually a very negative thing. Of course, Egypt Air was on the list of the airlines that were banned from carrying laptops and so on. Most recently, during Sisi's visit to DC, again, it was also about the optics, the big White House welcome, Oval Office photos, and Trump saying, Egyptian-US relations are back on track. However, there are issues for both sides moving forward. So even though there's this huge welcome of Sisi in Egypt, but on the American side, there's a move to cut the budget. And a big part of that is U.S. aid towards Egypt. So there are potential cuts that are for next year in the aid, and moving for aid into a loans program. That's one of the proposals. But then again, the aid for Egypt is actually not aid per se. It's more subsidies for U.S. weapons manufacturers. So there's a domestic issue there as well. If there's cuts on the aid, because some of this money, of course, is used to buy U.S. weapons.
So what you're saying is not black and white. Trump would say good things about the president of Egypt and the Egyptian regime, but at the same time will not go out of his way to do more than what he sees as his best interests, and there will be cuts, in fact, on the aid and on other things.
Exactly. These are some of the options that are.
So maybe there will be disappointments as well.
Well, perhaps there will be disappointments. However, also, if Trump is looking towards the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, he knows that Egypt will be a key part of any success or potential success he will have there. So that's why keeping the Egyptian government on hand on that issue specifically works. Also, on the Egyptian side, there are a number of, a major issue is the relationship with Russia. So as Sisi reestablished relationship with the US, over the past 4 or 5 years, there's been a strong deepening of the Egyptian-Russian relationship in terms of weapons supplies, and also in terms of joint training exercises. For the first time since the 60s, the Russian troops allegedly on Egyptian ground in training and bases and so on. And also the Russians are building a nuclear reactor in Al-Dab'a in Egypt. So again, this is an issue on the Egyptian side, how they balance the Russians and the Americans in a very similar Cold War sort of fashion, and not antagonize both sides.
In a nutshell, Libya.
Libya, it's unclear.
But in a nutshell.
Nutshell, I can't. It was
okay.
3 minutes. Libya, in a nutshell, is that also there's no clear U.S. policy towards Libya, and I want to bring back to the first point about the optics of it. Trump focusing on fighting terrorism, ISIS, Israel-Palestine, perhaps. Libya is not high on the U.S. public's agenda, and it brings back memories of Benghazi and the hearings and Hillary Clinton and so on. So he does not understand. It's not high on his priority of things. Most recently, of course, the Italian Prime Minister was visiting the White House and was trying to tell Trump the importance of Libya, because Libya is not only a security issue for North Africa, because there's weapons seeping through to the Egyptian side, or fighters, Tunisia and Algeria and Morocco, but also to Europe. It's an issue of big stability to Europe in terms of illegal migration, energy security, and so on. And actually, during the news conference, after the Italian Prime Minister really stressed the importance of Libya and stability in Libya, Trump, quote unquote, said, "I do not see a U.S. role in Libya." And I think the United States has right now enough roles. So this is quite incredible to see this. And of course, as the US retreats potentially from role Libya, the Russians are moving in to step such a void, and I can elaborate on this afterwards.
Okay, great.
Tamam.
Well, any comments on what you heard between each other? You wanna start, John?
I'll jump in. One thing that Adel said that I think is so important to understanding the new president and the new administration is the firmness which world leaders, particularly strong men around the world, like about him. One of the real challenges in foreign capitals with President Obama was the perception of weakness, or the perception of being too deliberative. And that frustrates a world leader, and it frustrates a strong man even more. Trump is the opposite. And so I think they see that and they say, here's a president who is, when he is articulating a view, articulates it clearly, explains exactly what he wants or what he expects, whether it's handing Angela Merkel an invoice for dues, whether it is saying we're absolutely moving the embassy in Israel, or whatever issue it is. He's very firm. The problem is Trump's approach is speak first and understand it later. And we've seen this in a variety of areas. We've seen this with moving the Israeli embassy, the US embassy in Israel. It was very easy just to move this. There was no questions asked. If the president wanted to, it would have already been done. But it hasn't been, because he spoke first and had to figure it out later. In domestic politics, with the healthcare bill that sought to repeal and replace Obamacare, the president called the Speaker of the House and said, you will vote on it this week. The Speaker didn't have the votes to pass the bill. And in American politics, if a bill is going to fail in our lower house, the Speaker pulls it. He will not vote on something that will fail. He spoke first and had to figure out what to do later. In that case, he had to figure out that he wasn't getting his wish. And so I think from the outside, any initial interaction that a lot of world leaders will have with President Trump will be positive, because he'll say, this is what I think, this is what I think, this is what I think. And whether you like it or not, you know what the president is thinking. But then down the road, his ability to deliver on that, his willingness to go back on that when the realities of governing and the realities of not just domestic politics, but of the intricacies of world politics set in, there are many leaders around the world who I feel like the president now, but a year from now are going to wonder, in the same way that we've spoken about in the last half hour, just what direction this ship is going to have. And so, like I said, that initial impression, I fully understand around the world being very positive of the president, but when you start to break down what those campaign promises were and what they've translated into in the first 100 days of governing, and even within the first 100 days of governing, what some of the rhetoric and promises are and what they have translated to have had a C between them. And that presents medium and long-term problems for the president on the world stage, as well as on the domestic stage.
So are these, and maybe the question goes to Abdullah and Adel, I mean, are these, because you cannot, you see words and then retreat. You see commitment and then a negation of that commitment. So are these the symptom of a superpower in retreat compared to other powers? The Chinese, the Russians? Is the US in some sort of a retreat as a result of its adventure in Iraq, 2003, Afghanistan, before that, continues, its commitments, its financial, etc. Is it in retreat at some level or another? I'll come back to you, John, on this,
Sure,
because you may have another point, but let me hear from you, please.
It's a very good question. In fact, this question has been going on for a while,
Yes.
as the United States been in retreat, especially during the Obama.
As an imperial power, as an imperial project.
Yes, and
Not as a country. Maybe it's, yeah.
Yeah. So, and this is, I think, what Trump has tried to use even during his campaign. You know, we want America powerful, we want it strong, we want America first. And therefore, he was, of course, appealing to the American people that, you know, we need America to be strong and secure, but also we want to concentrate on our politics internally. However, any American leader is not going to be allowed the luxury of sitting there and not being engaged with the outside world. It's just the world has become too intricately integrated that any administration will have to be involved. And he had a rude awakening. International politics did not allow him, so he had to actually do things that he didn't want to do. He did things that he said before the election that he wasn't going to do, that John had just eloquently explained. So is the United States in retreat? It depends how you look at it, but I think he's financially, in terms of military power, he's asking for another 10% increase in the budget. So that's going to make the United States the most powerful, if it's not already the most powerful military power in the world. I don't think it's in retreat. Yes, there are going to be challenges. There's always going to be a challenge. The world, the political system, the global system cannot live with a unipolar polar or one power. So while Russia is trying itself to impose itself in the arena, the Chinese are doing the same. However, the Chinese are still light years behind. And economically, they are very powerful. The One Road, One Belt project is, if you've heard that the train has actually reached London, all the way from China. So they're really building this. They're really investing heavily on economic belt, the Silk Road belt. And also, they are doing a lot here in the region, strategic relationship. But in terms of military power, they're not going to match the Americans. They're not going to match the Russians. And I don't think the Russians are in a position to challenge the United States either. They want a piece of the cake and piece of the action. But I think the United States will continue to be the global power for time to come.
Thank you.
Thank you. I agree with Dr. Abdullah, and there's always these debates on the end of Pax Americana and what comes out after. And of course, if you look at the end of the Cold War and end of history and so on, so I don't think it's a retreat per se. I think perhaps other countries are resurgent and trying to take their spot in the world. And you see that clearly around the world. Russia was quite weakened in the 90s, but do a combination of nationalism and oil prices and oil production is seeking to reassert its influence in the world. And if you look from a Russian perspective, what has happened since the 90s is there was an expansion of NATO all the way up to the Ukrainian border. So a Russian would argue like, no, it's time for us to reassert ourselves and push back on some of this. In China, as Dr. Abdullah mentioned, China has had some incredible economic growth and now is seeking to be part of the global coalition. But I don't think their aim is to upend the existing order. I think their aim is to be part of that order and a stronger part, especially in Asia. So there's two in Asia, for example, there's two clear tests of this, is the North Korea issue and of course the expansion in the South China Sea. So how Trump deals with the China issue and the South China Sea specifically will be key. And for example, some of the rhetoric of Trump, the campaigner against China, has been very softened. And President Xi was welcomed to Mar-a-Lago. And again, great optics. And Ivanka's daughter came and sang in Chinese and so on. So again, all of this rhetoric in the campaign has softened. So to answer your question, I don't think it's in retreat because, of course, the numbers and the defense spending support. But of course, there is a bit of a realignment with the ascendance of other powers.
Okay, great.
Just to add briefly, I agree with much of what was said. I think if you look at the president's staffing and you look at the president's budget request, you see two different answers to that question. As Dr. Baabood said, The president wants to increase military might above what is already a very mighty military. If that is true, that hard power approach, that offense approach, will certainly not be in retreat and may resurge, particularly compared to the Obama era. On the other hand, when you have not replaced the diplomatic corps of the United States, and you are looking to downsize the State Department, not just in terms of personnel, but also in terms of funding, in world politics, diplomacy exists. And where American diplomacy recedes, something else fills that vacuum. And if that is the case, the Americans stepping back from a diplomatic perspective does not mean that those diplomatic relations go away. Someone else will fill that void. And if the president is smart, believes he's smart enough to be able to negotiate diplomacy around the world one-on-one, as he has with Premier Xi and others, he's going to learn very quickly the importance of the State Department. And if he puts all of that upon his own shoulders or his son-in-law's shoulders, he's going to see that recession of American diplomatic might, which will undercut everything that he wants to do with the Defense Department. The only saving grace, I believe, in this sense, is that the president has surrounded himself with 3 individuals in national security positions who are former generals, who understand diplomacy. They're not just bomb droppers. They're people who appreciate the value of a powerful and well-intentioned State Department. The National Security Advisor, the Secretary of Defense, and the Secretary of Homeland Security are 3 people who have that worldview and whom, by all accounts, the president is listening very closely to.
Question here. On retreat, isn't building walls a sign of retreat or a sign of power? Isn't banning people that general a sign of strength or a sign of weakness? Civilizations, when they are confident, they open up. When they're in some sort of retreat, they're not balanced. One decision is against the other. Obama was weak. Maybe that was the condition of the United States of America at that era, after a Bush era that weakened the United States tremendously through its adventures. So that's why I'm asking this question. Building a wall against Mexico, towards Mexico, is a sign of strength or weakness?
I think one approach could be that building walls like this, whether they're physical or policy walls, is a sign of weakness. I actually think in this instance, it's a sign of total ignorance. It's a sign of an individual who does not understand the weaknesses of the policy and the peripheral consequences that those policy choices bring with them, whether it is with the Muslim and Arab world, whether it is with a key trading partner in Mexico. No matter what it is just campaign rhetoric that was ignorant of the policy context in which the words were uttered. You could see it as weakness or recession, but I truly think it's just a president who doesn't understand.
How about another question here? Sorry to ask too many questions. Is the fact that someone like Trump was elected a sign of fatigue in the superpower USA? The fact that he was able to get through with his credentials, this couldn't have happened 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago.
I think
Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, you name them.
The Trump election, of course, is quite unique, but I believe it also has to be seen within the context of a resurgence of this ethno-nationalism and sort of right-wing politics around the world. There's a financial crisis. There are forces of globalization happening. There's automation. There's less jobs. A lot of the blue-collar jobs, not just in the U.S., but in Europe and across the world, are being cut back due to a number of factors. So I think Trump is part of this phenomena. If you look at France, Marie Le Pen, in Holland, and so on. So I think in developed, established democracies, there's a bit of fatigue with establishment politicians, and people are seeking other solutions, or on the far right or on the far left. If you look at Podemos in Spain, on the left, if you look at in Greece, Syriza. So people are just there's a bit of fatigue and against established politicians, and people are looking for answers. And of course, there's the big issue with immigration, because what's easy when you lose your job in somewhere in out west in the US or in a factory in Europe, the easiest to blame, you blame A, your politicians, B, you blame the migrants, okay? So you have these right-wing populist politicians coming to just straight away, the electoral platform, whether Trump to Le Pen, or there's lots of similarities and very common themes, and it's almost like a manual now you can pick up. I think even in Australia, I don't know if you follow Australian politics, the Liberal Party has begun a bit of a lurch towards the right to cater for this voter. So I think it's part of a wider phenomenon across the world.
I don't think this is also the first time we've seen isolationist policies in the United States. We've had it before, and some administrations wanted to kind of isolate the United States, where other groups were saying, the United States had to play its global role, and the liberal thinkers. So I think it's kind of internal battle between the isolationists and the globalists, if that's the right way to explain it. And it's also part of a global phenomena that is going on, not only in the United States, but and self-explained in Europe as well. When things are not going well, it's better. It's a tendency for some leaders to say, well, let's close the borders, let's make wars, whether they are physical or policy, and concentrate on the local, kind of appeal to the popular vision and the popular view. And of course, if you're in the United States, you see that your unemployment is high, immigration is coming, migrants are taking your jobs. You see that the United States policies are not really, the administration is not serving the interest of the people, and just trying to play this global role at the cost of your local community and your local people. You would vote for someone like him because that's what he says to you. I will protect you. I will make sure you get the job. I will keep the foreigners out. And the contradictory thing is he's helping the Iraqis, he's helping the Syrians, and who are helping him to fight ISIS, but he's also stopping them from coming to the United States. People who are fighting with him against ISIS, and they are the two countries in the list. So there are really contradictory policies that it's too early to say, and I think he's just venturing everywhere at the moment, trying to see how the things will look like. But certainly he is going to learn a few lessons. I just want to add something about what worries me is the amount of power that he's giving to the generals over decision making. That's something that we need to kind of watch, because in the past the civilians had much more say on how to deploy the army or to deploy the U.S. forces, etc. Now the generals have much more power, and although some of them are highly experienced and worked in the Gulf states and the region, but they are also some of them have very strong views as well about Iran, about the relationship in Iran, and are we going to have a confrontation with Iran? If that's going to happen, where is it going to be? It's not probably it's not going to be in Iran soil, it's going to be in Iraq. And that is, Iraq is a country that has had enough of its, of the fights and problems, that it does not really require another confrontation, another military action.
And how would his confrontations in Iraq and Iran and help the American worker? It will destroy what the American worker that he promised, the white American who is unemployed, who thinks that the migrant is taking their job, which in reality is not true, is a camouflage of a deeper problem. The reality, America, when it was evolving, it wanted immigrants. It wanted everybody to come. So it wanted youth to come. Now, by going through this thinking, it's hurting America. And if he goes into an adventure, it will hurt further. And maybe the Iranians will come out stronger. Some militarism. I mean, the adventure in Iraq, in the start, is the adventure that produced a stronger power out of Iran during the Bush administration. You see, what I said, we had the Bush administration go to war. Then we had Obama is the direct result. I understand where Obama is coming from, a direct result of the failures of the two administrations of Bush and the economic and military failures. Now, Trump is coming, but I see failure. Do you agree with me, John?
I think in terms of the
I see problems coming, more problems. I don't know.
I mean, the destabilization of American interests on the world stage will certainly impact negatively the average American worker for a variety of reasons. I think specifically the conflict with Iran would have less of a problem because Iran is not a powerful trading partner with the United States. A stronger Iran that then begins producing goods or services that then interrupt American trading routes because it takes from other countries, that could cause trouble for the average worker. I don't think a conflict with Iran is as devastating as a conflict with China or a conflict with Mexico or a conflict with another core economic power or entity that we rely on economically.
A military conflict?
A conflict generally, whether it's military with Iran, whether it's trade-based with Mexico, or just a breakdown in diplomacy. However it is, I think that the challenge, let me back up. I'm not convinced that that individual conflict would be as devastating to the average worker. I think instability generally becomes devastating, but for the average worker, I think it's very difficult to trace through how foreign policy and foreign policy destabilization ultimately makes its way to their paycheck. I think that's difficult for a policy analyst to understand. I think it's difficult for an expert on the region to understand. No matter an out-of-work American who's struggling to make ends meet to try to put food on their table. And so I think even in the context in which some of the president's actions do negatively affect an average worker, it's not clear that he will pay a political price, because if the worker can't understand the exact path by which that happens, they won't blame him. And I think that's true if you look at some of what the president has done so far and the unwillingness of his own base, even when they are being hurt, to hold him to account for it.
Okay, question to you. 2018, there is elections in the US. What do you see in the coming elections? Democrats, Republicans? And then we open it up for a discussion.
Okay, briefly, I think
Just
a lot of Trump's base is looking. They care a bit less on the foreign policy issues, and are looking at the bread and butter issues. And a lot of the promises that were made for domestic promises in the first 100 days are not being met. This bonanza of jobs has not started.
Yes.
The wall has not been built, and if it's going to be built, it's going to be built and paid for by Americans. So I think bit by bit the base is coming to realize this. But the question is how much of the base will be influential, because there's always going to be a big chunk of red voters who are not going to be swayed. And to the center of this, there's a number of voters who perhaps really disliked Hillary Clinton and voted for Trump, but given another chance and given time to have reflected for 1 year, would perhaps vote Democrat if they're open to actually having viewed those the first year.
Okay. Abdullah, you have any comment on this? 2018, mid-election.
It's too early to judge, too difficult. It's only been 100 days. It's really difficult to tell where this president is taking the United States.
Okay, the coming 100 days, how do you see the coming 100 days?
I
as good as these 100 days?
I wanted to also add that we've been saying a lot of negative things about Trump. And I think also if you look at the media, if you pick up any newspaper or an article, there are a lot of negative things about him. But he might surprise us. The man is not an ideologue. He's a very pragmatic man. He can change his mind. He can go with the flow. He said he would, and we've seen it. And he might have actually some solutions to the region. He's powerful. Okay. He's strong. He says what as John is saying, he says what he wants. He can appeal to international leaders because they can deal with someone who's strong. I mean, even to look at Israel and the Palestinian issue, he could actually surprise us by coming up with something really strong there and forcing the two sides to live together and two-state solution.
When do you think he will surprise us?
It's difficult.
I mean, because if you say 100 days from now, let's have a panel 100 days from now
200
and discuss the surprises.
But there are people who will say that he is not going to last more than one term.
Okay, Abdullah, thank you. What do you think? Would he last more than a term? I mean, it's obvious what he will finish 4 years, unless there is a big story on the Russians. Right?
I'm a skeptic to believe that the president will not serve a full term in office. Okay. If something does happen with the Russian scandal, I think that is the only situation in which a Republican House ultimately would impeach their own president. Short of that, he'll finish a full term.
Okay.
Your initial question on the 2018 elections, this is a complicated answer, but I'll be as brief as possible. In the U.S., we elect our lower chamber of the legislature entirely every 2 years.
Exactly.
We elect 1/3 of our upper chamber every 2 years.
Which is the Senate.
Senate.
So Senate and the House, right?
So the Senate, 1/3 will be go up for election in 2018. Most of those seats are currently held by Democrats. So the ability of the Democrats to make progress is quite limited because the Republican seats that are up there are very few vulnerable seats, 1 or 2. So I would not be surprised if the Democrats held the numbers that they currently have or even lose a couple of seats in 2018. The House is very different, though. The House, the Republicans have more than a 40-seat majority. It is already too small of a majority to govern. The Speaker of the House, who I think is actually a political disaster and a liability to the president, he cannot govern with what is a sizable majority right now. If Republicans lose seats in the midterms in the House, which they almost certainly will, that will make Paul Ryan's job as Speaker all that much harder. And in American politics, elections are decided by the middle, by independents. In 2016, Hillary Clinton got about 90% of the vote from Democrats, and Donald Trump got about 90% of Republicans to vote for him. And Trump carried about 47 or 48% of independents. In the latest polling, about 30% of independents believe Trump is doing a good job. So the president is in a real disastrous position with independents who will make the midterm elections very difficult for him if that number holds. Now, it's important to note we are, 18 months away from the midterm elections. And I mean, a day is a year in American politics. 18 months is an eternity. If we come back here in October of 2018, we might be talking about a resurgent Trump, a resurgent President Trump, if Dr. Baabood is right and he surprises us, who wins those independents back. And that would drastically change the landscape of the midterms in the United States. If they were held today, it would be a slaughter for Republicans.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, we have to hear some your questions, but can you make them brief? How much time do we still have?
25 to 30 minutes.
30 minutes, very good, 30 minutes. So really be brief. Okay, over there, please.
Good afternoon. My name's Beverly Milton-Edwards. I'm with the Brookings Center. Brief question on Iran. I think you're right, Abdullah, that the indications are not good. In fact, I would say if I was the leader of a Gulf capital, I would not be sleeping easy at night, and here are the reasons why. I wonder if you agree. Firstly, as you said, the nuclear deal, forget it, it's not going to be torn up. That was a promise he made. He's broken the promise already. Secondly, there's no evidence that he's going to designate the IRGC, which is of considerable concern. Thirdly, all the indications are that he's happy for companies like Boeing to go back into Iran and engage in multi-billion-dollar business deals. And fourthly, he's allowing Americans to go back and reopen up accounts. It looks like it's business as usual in Iran, and I think that should be of concern to the Gulf states.
Question? Do you have a question? Or?
Yes, does he agree?
Do you agree? So the question is to any of the three?
That they should be losing sleep.
Why don't you write down the questions? We'll take several questions and comments, and then I leave it. But do really take notes of it. All right, then we take one from here. I'm going to leave you till the last. You are always a good questioner. You ask questions, and they're very long, so I'm afraid, you know, I'm terribly, yeah, but go ahead.
Okay, Rufaida Amr Azam, a student in international affairs. My question is open to any of the distinguished speakers. What's your analysis of the American airstrike in Syria after the chemical attack of Khan Shaykhun? Is it a real change in American policy in the Syrian crisis, or is it just propaganda for
US and
America
Syria?
is a great
so
again?
Any of you who would like to? Thank you very much. Over there, yes, please.
Hello, I'm Shashi and visiting fellow at Qatar University. My question is about, it's open, and it's about, since Trump policy is American first and America first, how you see his immigration policy and impact on economic development in terms of HB1 visa, reduce on banning and banning on some countries, as America always define and believe in bring best mind in America.
Yeah, so the policy on immigration, basically. Okay, please.
I have a question about Donald Trump's latest allegation.
Your affiliation?
My
your
name is Reem Al-Harami. I am at MOFA and I'm also a writer at Sharq newspaper. I have a question about Trump allegations on Obama, wiretap and Trump Tower. And it's really interesting, although that he won the election, he still brings up issues from the presidential elections with Hillary Clinton and with Obama as well. For example, comparing the number of crowds during the inauguration day, and then the wiretap and claim that he showed no evidence on whatsoever. How do we understand that from Trump's side and his supporters also who are backing such claims? How do we understand that? Hasn't he moved yet from candidate Trump and he became more presidential?
Okay, candidate Trump. That's a nice question. One last question, then we get answers, then we do another round, okay? Please.
Good afternoon. Amr Abdul Aziz, a journalism student from Qatar University. So my question is, with the rise of the progressive left in the political spectrum in America, with Bernie Sanders now being the most popular senator, is it possible to see a progressive president in the future? And how can that affect the international affairs of America? Thank you.
I like that question. So, but let's see. I mean, that's a good question. Okay, we have answers now. You're the last one today, right? Or you will ask me in private.
In private.
Okay, all right.
Private.
Then, where do we start? Who would like to volunteer first?
Sure. I'll
Let's
just
go.
briefly
Yes,
on
please.
the American airstrike again to the point about the optics. There was a big speak about not interfering in Syria, and then all of a sudden, overnight, there was an airstrike. A cynical person would say that this airstrike was more designed for local consumption, and the president's polling number were doing very badly. So a bit of cynicism on the airstrike, especially that it's not yet followed by a big, longer-term plan for Syria. What is the U.S. role in Syria going to be? What is the potential solutions?
So you see it as a one thing?
I see it potentially from cynical terms, this airstrike. I'm a bit of a cynicist myself. Again, in terms of the wiretapping, these, again, in the same vein, the wiretapping allegations was used to sidestep some of the criticisms that the administration was getting. So there was an allegation of wiretapping, has not been proved yet. And I think, in fact, in Congress and a number of other have come out and said that this is actually not true. I think also Trump is a master of controlling the news cycle. So if things are going perhaps badly, you can always see him also tweeting at 5 a.m. and 6 a.m., knowing that his morning couple of tweets will enter into the news cycle, being able to direct attention or away attention from certain things. So again, on these two issues, they are related. Finally, on because the progressive question, I like this question as well. Bernie Sanders and the Greens candidate, there's lots of promise to build a movement, but what happens is the argument is if votes go away from the far to the far left, then the Democrats tend to lose. I would love to see a progressive movement, but then again, it has to be based on longer-term objectives and not just a bit of populism, and we're going to do this. But what has happened, arguably, is some of the Greens voters, potential Hillary voters, voted for Jill Stein, and then this had actually affected the outcome of the election. So we need to be able to prioritize, yes, a progressive movement, but what is the impact of this on presidential outcomes?
I will leave all the difficult questions to John to answer, but I just want to also tackle one of them, if I may, at least, or two. One is the Iran issue. I agree with you that it is very difficult to predict what is going to happen with Iran. The previous administration also foresaw that you couldn't stop the Iranian nuclear program by just basically going there and bombing the sites. That will only allow Iran to come back and pull out of the NPT and give it a chance to declare it's a nuclear power. And the best solution they saw is that to have an agreement, a nuclear agreement that at least stops it for a decade, and then go on from there and see what happens. I think the Trump administration, despite what they have said, despite what he said in the pre-election rhetoric, I think he's going to rescind to this kind of view. And I think the world will be much better if we can have engaged Iran as a responsible regional country in the region. Of course, we have issues with Iran. We want those issues to be resolved, but it has to be engaged. Cutting off Iran or trying to demonize it as others would like to see, I don't think that is going to help the situation. From a Gulf perspective, it's a neighboring country. It's a very important country. Of course, we have issues, many issues with Iran, but demonizing a country and cutting off has never actually worked. Sorted out any problem. And I think the United States started to feel, or will continue to understand, that Iran is a very important country. It's not, in terms of the China route, you can see that the Chinese have actually built most of their strategy, the Silk Road, around Iran. The Gulf states are almost excluded from the route as well. And that's because of the conflict between the Gulf states and Iran. It's only if we can resolve these conflicts that we can benefit from this global dynamic change that is taking place. So the Chinese want Iran back. The Russians have good relationship with Iran. And I think the Americans will also realize that they want to continue the same route and with their agreement. It's, you know, it's an international agreement signed by international partners as well. It's not just the United States. Europe is also there. And I think it is too important an issue for the United States to give up on Iran. The only problem I see is if there is an escalation by some kind of mistake that could happen. You know that the Gulf waters is full of Iranian boats and American boats and so on, and you can have unintended conflict that could erupt. And here is someone is totally unpredictable in the United States, and you don't know how is he going to react to this. I don't think he's going to sit in front of the TV channel and see that the American soldiers are being humiliated by the Iranians. I think he is going to react, and this is something that worries me.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
I will very quickly run through all four of these questions, so bear with me. First, on the American airstrikes in Syria. I agree with Adel. This is probably a one moment that happened and is not part of any comprehensive American policy from this administration towards Syria. It was reactionary on behalf of the president. That's not a critique. I think it was just a moment that he felt he needed to act because of the use of a chemical weapon. In terms of public policy, 62% of Americans supported the president's use of airstrikes in Syria. It had no effect on his overall job approval rating. Americans are able to separate out events and overall performance, and they did so on Syria, and I believe they'll continue to do so as well. On the question about America First, and how that might hurt the economy. I do believe that most Americans understand that this American First approach, which has not yet fully been articulated by the president, but one of the steps in that direction are these barriers, policy and physical barriers that the president wants to construct to keep others, however that's defined, out. To give you an idea from a public polling perspective, the courts that have stopped the Muslim ban right now, the American public supports the court's decision to do that by a margin of 58 to 36. They think that the courts on that issue are acting as an effective check on the president's power. The reason for that is, and the reason the president is moving forward with this, is that he has surrounded himself with his base for an entire campaign. And he believes what those supporters want is what America wants. But his supporters are not the whole of America. 36% sounds about right, the part of his base that would be very much in favor of that. The rest of America understands how the world works, and that that's bad public policy. It's important, too, to remember that this president was elected with 45% of the vote in an election in which 60% of Americans turned out to vote. A president in that position needs to expand his base, needs to reach out to people in the middle. You do not get reelected by narrowing yourself when you are a minority president, when you have been elected by that narrow of a majority, and not to mention, the other person in the race got 3 million more votes than you. The president hasn't done this yet. This is an issue that will hurt him badly, and he doesn't understand it yet. For Reem's question, Reem, very good to see you, as always. The question about Obama wiretaps of Trump Tower is what I was talking about before, a president who speaks first and understands later. He argued in a tweet, if you can call it an argument, the president said that Barack Obama wiretapped Trump Tower during the transition, or prior to the transition. The reality in American public policy is a president cannot order a wiretap. A United States attorney, a federal prosecutor, has to go before the FISA court, a national security court, and ask for a wiretap to happen. In reality, the president put himself in a very difficult position, because if it's not true, and it, by all accounts, is not true that a wiretap was placed in Trump Tower, then he's a liar. If it's true, then a FISA court found probable cause that the president's campaign or someone in Trump Tower was engaging with the Russians and that a national security investigation had to commence. That's worse than being a liar. That's something that is criminal. And this idea that President Obama just willy-nilly ran through buildings in America throwing wiretaps behind picture frames is nonsensical. And it speaks to the president's both inexperience as well as the president's unwillingness to be restrained in terms of a communication perspective. On the last point about a progressive president, this is a complicated answer. I do believe that a progressive president can be elected in the United States. I don't think that Bernie Sanders' current approval ratings reflect that. Bernie Sanders has high approval ratings because he's providing a populist message to an America that is hungry for it. That said, Bernie Sanders was a popular politician on the campaign trail. He spoke to a lot of people. He never endured negative attacks. And a candidate who does not endure negative attacks always looks better. Joe Biden didn't run for president. He's very well regarded in the United States. Joe Biden ran for president a couple of times, and you know what? He was really bad at running for president. When you start to face negative attacks, your approval rating naturally drops. I'll tell you who's more popular than Bernie Sanders is right now. Hillary Clinton in 2013. She had a 65% approval rating in the United States. Scandal intervened, and a year of negative attacks from Republicans intervened. It naturally lowers it. So I think Bernie Sanders is the wrong person to look at. I think the end of your question, however, is what does that mean for foreign policy, American foreign policy? This is a complicated answer because progressives are all over the map. I think if you look at someone like Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, who has now secured a spot on the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate, that is someone who is going to be, is obviously running for president in 2020, and is someone who is beefing up her foreign policy bona fides for the run. Bernie Sanders, on the other hand, I would argue, had less of an articulate foreign policy than Donald Trump. You never heard him speak about foreign policy, and when he did, he clearly didn't understand what he was talking about. And you could say the same about Donald Trump, not understanding what he was talking about in the foreign policy context, but he talked about things more. I think a longer campaign would have, if Sanders had beaten Clinton for the nomination, we would have had a better understanding of what his foreign policy vision is. But there's not a unique progressive American vision of foreign policy in the way that there's a neoconservative view of foreign policy in the United States. And so there are progressives with very strong foreign policy credentials, and we'll get to see in 2020 what that looks like. And so the long version, the short of that long answer is to say it's not clear what that will mean for foreign policy, but you have to stay tuned in 3.5 years when we elect another president, or have the opportunity to do so.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, more questions? Or you're tired? Or you want?
Can I just
okay,
something
please.
to ask John, because something that we haven't mentioned here, and that is JASTA. JASTA is something that, as you know, going to have a completely different effect on how the Gulf states in particular conduct their relationship with the United States. To what extent, John, from your perspective, that JASTA is being enforced there in the United States and is going to be implemented?
It is totally unclear. I mean, there is so much out of this administration that this administration has to think about. And it's oftentimes for a new administration very difficult to understand what they are going to do on a variety of topics. I can't answer that question because I have no idea what the administration is thinking. Part of that is that there are just not enough of personnel in place to speak about all of the issues that are relevant at a given time. And so, again, that's a weakness for a president who needs to be out in front on a variety of issues, whether it's trade, whether it's internal commerce, whatever it is. And he, again, is handcuffing himself without those personnel because a president can't do everything that is expected of him. The presidency is a team. The presidency is often said it's more than one man, and it is. But right now, it's about 3 people: the president, his daughter, and her son-in-law.
And John Bannon.
Not
Bannon. Bannon.
Oh, yeah, and Steve
Not
Bannon.
you, yeah. Bannon.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and Bannon sometimes, I guess. Sometimes he's locked out of the office, it sounds like.
Well, more questions, and then we will have to come to a closure. So anybody would like to ask, comment? I have to stand next to you because Yes.
Thanks,
Yes,
thanks,
but you have
Professor
half a
Shafiq.
you have
Yeah,
half a
of
minute.
course.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So yes, yesterday I heard Trump speaking in Pennsylvania. He insulted all actors, media men, and even Warren. He told she's a banker, a bankrupter. So what I mean, the first 100 days were chaotic, controversial. This man is thinking with the mentality of 70s and 60s, with the possibilities of 21st century. America not the greatest. America now is still only a superpower with $20 trillion debt, divided, ethnic and social, and so he's facing a lot of problems. What interesting me, I am Middle Eastern. Dr. Adel spoke about Egypt, but we are in the hell of Egypt. What is concerning me, horrifying me, the next 100 days which is coming, what is happening, the double standards, hypocrisy in dealing with the Middle East.
Let us get an answer.
This is
yes.
very important.
Very important. So, we register these points.
Sure.
And the next 100 days, right? This is the most.
Okay,
what
you,
do you see in the next
you,
100 days? Thanks for this contribution. Any other question?
Thank you.
No,
Next,
I didn't.
next.
No, we have to.
2 or 3
We will continue the discussion.
We'll continue.
I promise you.
We will.
Yes. Okay. Question? Any other question? Please, please.
Excuse me. Actually, I just need to ask you that what basically the US, Trump actually, he sees as the one belt, one road initiative of China, and how does they see that? Do you
get the question again?
Than that?
Say the question again to the panel.
One more time.
I'm not going to answer it.
Sorry, and I'm just asking that how the Trump sees the one belt and road initiative of China. Okay. Do they want to take part in that, or how do you?
So how does Trump see?
Yes.
China?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the question. Please.
Excuse me. Over here.
Over here, please.
Thank you very much. Willy Campbell, I'm the ambassador of Austria to the state of Qatar. There was one thing that I would question what you said.
Please.
We've seen with a lot of US presidents, they always go for the second term. Mm-hmm. Are we really sure that Trump wants a second term? Or is Trump maybe a new model of US president who only goes for one term and he plays it out? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Let me.
So this is a question. We're going to take another one or two over here, please.
Hi, I have 2 quick questions. First of all, do you think Trump will be impeached, as many people have been predicting? And the second question is, why let the American people vote when the last decision goes to the Electoral College, on who's going to be elected as a president? Thank you.
Okay. We have a question here, and we have a question here.
Just a brief question. How optimistic are you that foreign policy is actually going to firm up in the next year? And secondly, do you think Trump will actually be able to deliver on it?
These are all directed to John.
No.
Now, and to the panelists, you can react in any way you would like. Okay. And there is a question over there. And over here, and we'll end the question.
His Excellency.
Yes, please.
Good afternoon.
Good
My
afternoon.
name is Alexandra. I would like to ask you, do you think Donald Trump will eventually attack North Korea, and what is the risk of nuclear war?
Okay. So a question on the possibility of an attack by Trump on North Korea.
North Korea.
Okay. Please.
Another one? Okay.
Thank you. Christophe Payot, I'm the ambassador of Belgium. You mentioned the influence also of the 3 generals around Trump. Could you elaborate a little bit on their vision of the Middle East in particular, and also from Secretary of State Tillerson? Because Trump is supposed to listen a lot to his advisors, and those are 4 people having a big influence, I think, on his final decision, apart from his son-in-law and daughter. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, then, these answers and any final comments you have. I think this will almost, we're at the end of our session.
Sure. I will
Wanna
go
start?
I will
You seem
very quickly.
very eager to start.
Yeah, there's,
Okay,
there's a
let's
lot
see.
of ground to cover, and so I'll do that. Hold on.
And the next 100 years, this was the most important question.
Absolutely.
100 days.
And he still has other questions that will continue for next session.
So on the question of whether the president will seek a second term, I was very careful not to touch on that. I do believe he will finish his first term, to your question on impeachment. What it takes to impeach and remove an American president is so great that in 240 years we've never done it. And so there are political and constitutional challenges that make that almost impossible. As I said, if something becomes very clear that the president, that as a candidate, Donald Trump was personally having these types of transactional interactions with Russia, that will do it. The benefit for Republicans is the next person in line, Mike Pence, is someone who's very appealing to them. I used to say with George Bush, Dick Cheney was his bulletproof vest because no one wanted Dick Cheney to be president. And so that prevented anything from ever happening in terms of impeachment with President Bush. But yeah, I don't think it's going to happen barring some odd Russia revelation. For the second term, I actually don't know. I can see that argument that the president would be disinterested in a second term. No matter what happens in his first term, just say, I succeeded, I'm done, I'll leave it to the next person. But also there is a level of hubris with the president that would make me think his thought process would be, everyone else since James Polk in the 1840s has run for a second term, I'm doing it too. So I could see hubris is going to affect either of those decisions, or either of those choices, and I am not in the business of predicting Donald Trump's hubris. Let's see. The next is about voting in the Electoral College. Why do so many people vote given that we elect a president with an Electoral College? Almost always, the popular will in the end is reflected in the Electoral College vote. And so people go out and do that as part of understanding that it will carry through, except when it doesn't, oddly. But there is a sense of, there's this sort of bifurcated situation in the United States where 40% of people don't vote in presidential elections, and they tend to be similar people from election to election. But for 60% of Americans, there's a real sense of duty to do this. Regardless of whether your vote gets watered down, regardless of whether you think it's gonna matter, you still go out and vote. And it's sort of an American value for a portion of the electorate that even in the face of your vote not mattering in the end, you still go out and do it. Yeah, by more than any other candidate in history. Yes. So a couple of other questions I'll touch on very briefly about the three generals. We know a little bit about the generals' views toward the Middle East. The challenge is generals typically are not speaking publicly when they're in uniform, with very few exceptions. And so for them to discuss a vision of foreign policy is complicated by the fact that A, they're not supposed to speak out of line from their commander-in-chief. And B, they're typically not individuals who are communicating publicly. And so when they are in uniform, you have to understand that what they are saying is often shrouded by the individual under whom they're working, the president. We have some evidence of Secretary Kelly, the Secretary of Homeland Security, his views on Iran. He is a firebrand when it comes to dealing with Iran. As Secretary of Homeland Security, he deals very little with Iran now. Jim Mattis is a flamethrower. He's a guy who rhetorically is very conflict-oriented. But since he's become Secretary of Defense, he seemed to take a very different approach to that and seems to be doing what we expect of a civilian, a former military leading a civilian entity like the Department of Defense. And so he, I think, understands as well as anyone in that cabinet the complexities of Middle East policy, even if his language on it previously was a bit incendiary. He understands, where the armies sit on the map and what the interconnected nature of that is. And so he spent a career as like a foul-mouthed general. And again, that's not a critique, just one of those gritty kind of generals. And now he has a new role, and he's, I can't say put his hat on, he's really taken his hat off. And I think that will inform the way that he tries to advise the president. And I'll...
North Korea?
Oh gosh, North Korea. Yeah. I mean, the idea of the president...
that's an important question that we...
The
yes,
idea,
and what do you see the coming 100 days? That's the other question.
I'll say this. I would not be surprised if the president ultimately did something targeted either in North Korea or more likely with a North Korean ship entering Japanese waters or something to that effect. It would hopefully be discussed with the Chinese beforehand. It seems from the outside that the Chinese are getting extremely frustrated with North Korea, which, we saw in Syria, President Assad taking a step too far in really sullying any goodwill he had, even with friendly countries, including the United States president. With North Korea, they can certainly go too far where China could say, President Trump, do what you want, within reason. But the North Korean dictator seems not to care about where that line is. So I could see him going across it. In terms of nuclear war, I mean, obviously that is North Korea's choice. As much as you might distrust the American president, he's not going to conduct a first strike of nuclear power in North Korea. The destabilizing effects, I think even he understands. But the ball's in North Korea's court in that sense. I'm going to hold off on the rest.
Abdullah.
Well, John, thank you. You've answered most of the questions. I just wanted to, I just want to say, about? Justa. Okay.
Answer the questions.
Okay. Justa?
Any question you'd like.
Okay, I just wanted
to focus on whatever.
Add something very quick. And someone asked about the Chinese Silk Road and whether the United States is going to object to that. I think the Chinese have been very clever in the way that they have constructed their strategy towards the region or towards the world as well. They have learned from the very bad experiences of Germany and Japan trying to challenge the dominant power at the time. So they are not challenging the United States. They wanted to work with the United States. They accept that the United States is the global power. They also understand that it's not only the United States that is running the global politics and the global economics, but also it is the other powers that it's aligned with, whether it's Europe, whether it's NATO, but also global institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, and so on. So the Chinese have not even tried to challenge that. In fact, if anything, they want to work through the existing system and not overhaul the existing system to bring in their strategies and kind of situate it within the system. So I think they have been very, very smart in doing that. They don't have any military ambitions in the region or security ambitions, etc. All they look for is, at least currently, is trade and economics and investment. And they are trying to show that they are going to be good for the region and for the world economy. So I don't see why the United States would object to that, or even the Europeans are objecting to that, because they are not challenging, if you like, the system. They want to work within the system. They are also welcomed in most of these countries in the region because they do not want to interfere in the political system. Unlike, for example, the Americans and the Europeans, at least the Americans in the past, where they would, they want to kind of have some kind of conditions in their trade and economic relations where American values or European values and democracy, human rights are kind of coached in within the trade and economic relations. The Chinese don't care less about human rights and how and governance in these areas. They will work with anybody who's in power, and that actually suits the regional countries. I just want to say that just quickly on the three generals, they do have some experience in the region, and some of that experience is actually quite anti-Iran, and that is kind of worrying. To what extent that they will, that this anti-Iranian sentiment that is going to build up in the relationship with the future relationship with Iran. I think there are, of course, checks and balances in the American administration, and no one is going to have the final say. But despite the fact that there is anti-Iranian sentiment there, I think there is going to be there are other areas, especially in the foreign in the foreign policy issue, that they will want to keep that relationship with Iran going on. The only issue is that if you have some kind of flaring up or an accident or something that could happen in the region, and if you are, if you're a military general, the only thing you can think about is, policy instrument you have is military. If you only have, what's the proverb says, if you only have a hammer, you see the world problems as a nail. So you just want to hit it. And that's how maybe that worries people about, this military, the generals, military powers in control of some of the United States policy. In terms of North Korea, I think I totally agree with John, but I think the Americans are going to find the very convenient way of working with the Chinese to kind of calm things down there.
Abdullah, I have a question, if I can be allowed, because the whole story of human rights is so important, and I'm not sure when the West would realize that much of the terrorism that they've been fighting for the last 16, 17, 18 years, and will be fighting with more devastating results for the coming 15 years, is a result of the lack of human rights in the regions where this terrorism is taking place, whether the Israeli occupation, Palestine, Arab-Israeli, or issues related to regimes in the region. And I think this realization is the one that will put the Americans back and the Europeans back. Plus, there is an international movement, Amnesty, you name it, human rights groups that put a lot of pressure. Do you see that? I mean, can you help me or help us see that side that's independent of what Trump is trying to do, President Trump is trying to do?
I totally agree with you. I think good governance, democracy, human rights are very important issues here, and some of the security problems, internal security problems, the rise of radicalization, etc., in the region is because of the lack of these things. And you cannot just fight them by military and win over them by military, by defeating them militarily. We have seen them, they will resurface. You destroy Al-Qaeda, you bring ISIS, you destroy ISIS, something else will come in its place. So the way forward is for this region is to also be part of the global system where there is good governance, there is human rights, there is political and economic liberalization, etc. And the U.S. has tried to do this through some of its strategies in the region, like promotion of democracy or democracy promotion in the region. The Europeans have tried to do it through a number of their strategies with the Mediterranean, also with the Gulf states, and it's been a stumbling block. The problem with these is that you have relationship between government to government. So when it comes to negotiating with governments, they want to discount human rights and democracy and so on. They don't want to talk about it. So how do you do it? You want to go down to the civil societies. The authoritarian regimes in these countries have so far been able to really make these civil societies totally ineffective. They have controlled them. They have created what is known as Congos, government-controlled civil societies that they actually have a say in how it is done. There is no real civil society. The middle class is a misnomer in this region. So when the European powers, the US want to deal with civil society here. They don't find the right, a genuine civil society. It's all kind of government run. So even when the West stood with the Arab Spring, you saw what happened. They all went against them. The regimes went against them. It was one of the stumbling blocks between in the relationship between the United States and the Gulf states. How did the United States let Mubarak go and so on? Of course, the Arab-Israeli conflict is it's something that is always going to be an issue, and it's a major issue because there is a mistrust. The population here in the region, they see that whatever the United States want to do or whatever the Europeans want to do is actually a trick. It's not genuine, because if it's genuine, let's do it start with the Arab-Israeli, resolving the Arab-Israeli conflict. So without resolving that, there is no belief in any U.S. policy, how far genuine it is, or European policies. Okay. Without resolving that conflict, it always becomes a black.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah.
Thank you. I think my esteemed colleagues have answered most of the questions, so I don't want to answer.
If you don't want to,
Just
you want to predict the coming 100 years?
100 days.
100 days.
Keep saying 100 years and it makes me worried.
100 days. Though you had a book on 100 years,
yeah, exactly.
I'm still thinking about it.
100 days. Yeah. I think the key thing in terms of foreign policy is to watch out for the appointments that are happening in the State Department at undersecretary level and below, and we're speaking with John as well on the State Department speaker and some of these appointments. But as we see, when I look right now and I see somebody like Dr. Sebastian Gorka on TV becoming a White House advisor, I worried. Allegedly he said that the best plan for Libya is to partition it over three and did it on a napkin. So I'm a bit worried about some of the advice that the president is getting. But on a side note, there's also people that are in ascendance in the White House, like somebody to watch, I think, is Dina Habib Powell, the American from Egyptian background, who initially was an advisor to Ivanka Trump and is now part of National Security Council. So there are some competent people, and I think she's actually going to play a bigger role in the coming period, and you see her perhaps ascend in administration. She was actually part of not only the CC Trump organization of the meetings, but also in the recent visit to Saudi Arabia, where I was actually part of the delegation to meet King Salman. So again, we just keep watch out for some of the staffing issues. The president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, tasked with bringing peace to the Middle East. I wish him the best of luck. With all, I really truly wish him the best of luck. But as many administrations over the years have found, that the Israeli peace process is not as straightforward as it seemed. But I do wish him the best of luck.
And any surprises? I mean, we analyze, but there could be shocks.
There's always surprises.
There are always surprises.
That's
so
the cue of the first
100 days from now, there could be shocks and surprises that no analysis can really count for. But really, I thank you a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, John, Abdullah, and Adel for this great discussion. And I thank the audience for their also engagement. And thank you. Thank you all of you. Thank you.